He rode into Dry Creek looking for a hot meal and a cold drink. That's what he told himself anyway. Ethan McKenna had been 3 months on the trail, and the dust had settled deep in his bones. The town was a handful of wooden shacks gasping in the summer heat, but to him, it looked like paradise. A saloon, a general store, and a place to rest his head. That was all he needed. Or so he thought. He tied his horse to the hitching post outside the Lucky Dollar Saloon and pushed through the doors. The air was thick with smoke and cheap whiskey. A bartender with mutton chops the size of small animals eyed him from across the room. "Whiskey," Ethan said, his voice raspy from the trail, "and information on a room." The bartender poured a glass of amber liquid that burned all the way down. "Sam Morrison's got rooms. Clean enough." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But if you're smart, you'll be angling for an invitation to the Whelan place." Ethan took another sip, letting the man talk. "Listening always told you more than asking. Tom Whelan's always looking for good hands," the bartender continued, "and he's got 2 daughters, one of them. Clara. She's the prettiest sight this side of the Mississippi." A man at a nearby table snorted into his beer. "Prettiest sight indeed. Clara Whelan could make a bishop kick a hole in a stained glass window." Another man chimed in. "Let's not forget the other one, the widow." The saloon went quiet for a beat. The bartender shook his head, a look of pity on his face. "Shame about Abigail. Life got a hold of her and wrung her out dry. Now she's just another burden on old man Whelan." "A burden's right," the first man said. "Comes with another man's kid. What cowboy in his right mind wants to saddle himself with that?" "No, Clara. She's fresh as morning dew. No complications." The saloon doors swung open and the world seemed to stop. A young woman stood there, bathed in the afternoon light. Golden hair, a dress the color of the sky, and eyes that swept the room like she owned it. She moved with a confidence that turned every head. "Mr. Garrison," she called out, her voice like a bell. "Mama needs to know about her fabric order." "Tuesday, Miss Clara," the shopkeeper replied, nearly bowing. Her eyes landed on Ethan. A slow, curious smile spread across her face. The kind of smile that promised everything and cost a man his soul. Then in a rustle of petticoats, she was gone. "That," the bartender said, "is Clara Whelan." But Ethan hadn't just been looking at Clara. Through the window, he'd seen another figure waiting outside. A woman in a faded black dress, her face hidden by a worn bonnet. She stood like a shadow behind the golden girl. As Clara emerged, the shadow fell into step behind her. For a moment, Ethan saw her face in profile. Strong bones, a firm jaw, and eyes that held the kind of fierce grace the desert couldn't kill. "The widow," someone muttered. "Abigail. Follows her sister around like a ghost." "Maybe she's protecting Clara from cowboys like him," another man joked, jerking a thumb at Ethan. The room laughed. But Ethan wasn't laughing. He was thinking about those 2 women, one a sunbeam, the other a shadow. The pretty sister everyone wanted, and the widow no cowboy would touch. He finished his whiskey and stood up. He'd come to Dry Creek for a hot meal and a bed. But something told him he'd found a hell of a lot more than that. The Whelan Ranch was just as the bartender described it. A big white house that looked like it had been plucked from back east and dropped in the middle of the unforgiving prairie. Cottonwood trees whispered in the wind, offering shade that felt like a blessing. Tom Whelan met him on the porch, a big man with a firm handshake and eyes that sized a man up in a single glance. He hired Ethan on the spot, $1 a day and found. "Supper's at sundown," Whelan said, his voice a low rumble. "We eat in the main house. My wife insists. Keeps the hands civilized." Just then the front door opened, and Clara appeared, a vision in pale pink. "Papa, Mama wants to know if—" "Oh." She stopped, her hand flying to her throat in a perfectly practiced gesture of surprise. "I didn't realize we had company." "This is Ethan McKenna," Whelan said with obvious pride. "Our new hand." "Mr. McKenna," she said, dropping a little curtsy. Her smile was even brighter up close. "I do hope you'll be joining us for supper." "Clara, stop dawdling!" a voice called from inside the house. Clara's face flashed with irritation for a split second before her sweet mask slipped back into place. "That's my sister Abigail," she said to Ethan, her voice light but laced with something sharp. "Quite the taskmaster." After she was gone, Whelan walked Ethan to the bunkhouse. "That's my youngest," he said. "Light of my life. Her sister Abigail. She lives with us, too. Lost her husband 2 years back. Fever. Left her with a boy to raise." He shook his head. "Hard thing for a woman, but she's a good help to her mother." The words hung in the air. A help, not a daughter. From the bunkhouse window, Ethan could see the back of the main house. A woman was hanging laundry, her movements quick and efficient. A small boy played at her feet with a carved wooden horse. It was the widow Abigail. Without the bonnet, he could see her face clearly. She wasn't pretty like Clara. Hers was a different kind of beauty. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. Her dark hair was pulled back, but a few strands had escaped, curling around a face that was all angles and resilience. She paused her work to bend down and say something to the boy. Her face softened, and for a moment, the harsh lines of her life seemed to fade away. She laughed, a quiet, surprised sound. Then, as if she felt his eyes on her, she looked up. Their gazes met across the yard. The world seemed to stop for a second time that day. Color rose in her cheeks, and she quickly turned away, grabbing her basket and hurrying inside, the boy trailing in her wake. Ethan lay back on his bunk. He'd come looking for wages, but he was starting to think the real business in Dry Creek wasn't about cattle or paychecks. It was about two sisters, one who shone like the sun, and one who had learned to live in the shadows. The dining room at the Whelan house was a testament to prosperity. A polished oak table, real china, and the smell of roasted beef thick in the air. Ethan, scrubbed clean but still feeling trail rough, found himself seated next to Clara. Her smile was a constant bright thing, aimed directly at him. Across the table sat Abigail, quiet and still as a stone. She'd changed into a plain dress, her hair pulled back so tight it looked severe. Beside her sat her son, Samuel, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. "Mr. McKenna has just come from a cattle drive," Clara announced to the table. "Was it terribly dangerous?" Before Ethan could answer, Abigail spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Clara, Mr. McKenna is trying to eat his supper." Clara's smile tightened. "I'm merely making conversation, Abigail. Something you might try occasionally." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush rock. Ethan saw Abigail's knuckles turn white as she gripped her fork. She didn't look at her sister. Instead, she turned to him. "How did you find the trail conditions this year, Mr. McKenna?" It was a real question, a rancher's question, and Ethan found himself answering her naturally, talking about water and grass and the price of beef. Tom Whelan joined in, and for a while the conversation was normal. But Ethan was acutely aware of the woman across from him, the way she cut her son's meat, the quiet efficiency of her movements, the scar, thin and white, on her thumb. "Mama," the boy piped up, "can I show Mr. McKenna my horse after supper?" "I'm sure Mr. McKenna has better things to do," Clara said dismissively. "I'd be happy to see it," Ethan said, catching the boy's disappointed look. Samuel beamed. Across the table, Ethan saw a flicker of something in Abigail's face. Surprise and maybe gratitude. Dessert was served, apple pie. As Clara passed him a slice, she leaned in close. "You simply must come to the social on Saturday. I'll save you a dance." Across the table, Abigail rose abruptly. "Excuse me, I need to check on the coffee." She fled to the kitchen. Clara watched her go with a small, satisfied smile. The power dynamic was clear. Clara was the princess. Abigail was the servant. When Abigail returned with the coffee pot, one of the ranch hands complimented her cooking. "Delicious as always, Abigail." A pleased flush rose on her cheeks. "Yes, Abigail is quite accomplished in the domestic arts," Clara said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "So fortunate, really. What would a widow do without such skills?" The cruelty was a blade, slid between the ribs so smoothly you barely felt it go in. Ethan saw Abigail's jaw tighten. He saw the confusion in her son's eyes. He put his fork down. "In my experience," he said, his voice casual but carrying across the suddenly silent table, "the most valuable people out here are the ones who know how to work. Pretty is pleasant, but competence is what keeps you alive. Clara's face turned a blotchy red. Tom Whelan cleared his throat, and across the table, the corner of Abigail's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. It was the first crack in her stony facade, and it was more beautiful than all of Clara's practice charms. After supper, Samuel tugged on Ethan's sleeve. You still want to see my horse, mister? Samuel, don't bother Mr. McKenna, Abigail said from the doorway, a dish towel in her hands. It's no bother, Ethan said, standing. He was a tall man, and he had to look down to meet her eyes. They were a deep hazel, he realized, with flecks of green he hadn't noticed before. That was a fine meal, Mrs. Carson, she supplied quietly. Abigail Carson. The boy led him to a corner of the porch and proudly presented a small, intricately carved wooden horse. Mama made it, Samuel said. She used to make pretty things before Papa went to heaven. Now she mostly makes useful things. The words, parroted from some adult conversation, hung in the air. Ethan handed the horse back. Useful things are important. Samuel looked up at him, his expression serious. Are you going to marry Aunt Clara? The question was so direct, it startled a laugh out of Ethan. Everybody tries to marry Aunt Clara, the boy explained. Mama says she's particular. Samuel! Abigail appeared, her face a mask of mortification. What have I told you about asking personal questions? She sent the boy inside. I apologize for my son, she said to Ethan. He doesn't understand. He's a fine boy. Bright. Too bright sometimes, she murmured. Thank you for being kind to him. Not everyone is. The words hinted at 1,000 small slights, 1,000 moments of cruelty her son had endured because of her situation. He felt a surge of anger on her behalf. He's lucky to have you. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Some of the tension left her shoulders. Welcome to the Whelan Ranch, Mr. McKenna, she said, her voice soft. Then she was gone, disappearing back into the house where her duties awaited. Ethan stood on the porch, listening to Clara's petulant voice from one room and Abigail's quiet lullaby from another. He had a choice to make. He knew it. Tom Whelan had all but offered him Clara's hand. It was the smart play. Marry the pretty daughter, secure a future. But as a coyote howled in the distance, Ethan found himself thinking of hazel eyes, work-worn hands, and a quiet strength that was more beautiful than any pretty face. He was in Dry Creek, all right, and he was in deep. The dust storm came out of nowhere, a rolling, angry wall of brown that swallowed the sun and turned the world into a howling nightmare. Ethan and the other hands were mending fences on the east pasture when they saw it coming. They spurred their horses for home, but the storm was faster. Visibility dropped to zero. Grit and sand stung his eyes and filled his lungs. Through the blinding chaos, he saw the ranch buildings, hazy and distant. Then he saw her, a lone figure near the small cabin set away from the main house. Abigail. She was fighting a losing battle with a flapping door, trying to nail a loose board across a window as the wind tore at her hair and whipped her skirts around her. He didn't think. He just rode. Get inside, he yelled, leaping from his horse as he reached her. She shook her head, her jaw set with stubborn determination. The window will break. Samuel's inside. He took the hammer from her hand. Inside, now. For once, she didn't argue. He hammered the board into place, then threw his weight against the door with hers, forcing it shut against the screaming wind. They dropped the bar into place. The sudden quiet was deafening. They stood in the small cabin, panting, both covered head to toe in fine brown dust. Her hair had come completely undone, falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. A small voice came from under the bed. Mama? It's all right, sweetheart, she said, her voice shaking only slightly. We're safe. The cabin was tiny, but it was a home. Curtains made from flour sacks, a bright rag rug on the floor. Everything was spotless. Everything spoke of a woman's desperate effort to carve out a space of dignity. A leak had already started in the corner, a steady drip, drip, drip into a pot she'd placed on the floor. I can fix that roof, he offered, when this passes. She looked at him, surprised. That's kind of you, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition. The storm howled outside, a wild beast trying to claw its way in. The forced intimacy of the small space was a tangible thing between them. To break the tension, she offered him coffee. He sat at the small table while she worked the stove. Samuel, his fear subsiding, crawled out from under the bed and brought his carved horse to show Ethan again. "Mama's teaching me letters," the boy announced proudly, and fetched a slate to show off his crooked, determined writing. "Mama says learning is important," Samuel informed him. "Even if we don't have much else, we have our minds." Ethan looked at Abigail. He understood everything in that moment, every sacrifice, every ounce of her pride. It was all for this boy, to give him a chance. "Your mama's a smart woman," he said. The storm raged. They drank coffee from mismatched cups. The conversation was light, careful, but underneath the small talk, deeper currents were flowing. "How long have you been widowed?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. 2 years, she answered simply. "James was a good man. We had 3 years together. It was more than some people get." "You loved him." It wasn't a question. She met his eyes, a challenge in their hazel depths. "Yes. Does that surprise you? That a plain woman could be loved?" "You're not plain," he said. The words were out before he could think. Heat rose in his face. Color bloomed on her cheeks. The air in the cabin crackled with something fierce and unspoken, as real as the lightning that occasionally lit the dust-choked world outside. She jumped up, breaking the spell. "I should check the other window." The storm was starting to die down, its fury spent. The howling wind was now just a sullen moan. The time for them to return to their separate worlds was coming. "I should go," he said, hating the words. She nodded, not looking at him. "Thank you. For your help." He paused at the door. "I meant what I said, about the roof. I'll come by tomorrow." "You don't have to." "I want to." She looked up then, searching his face. Whatever she saw there seemed to convince her. She gave a slow nod. "All right. Thank you." He stepped outside. The world was brown and still. He saw Claire on the porch of the main house, her dress miraculously clean, complaining dramatically about the storm. She called out to him, but he ignored her and headed for the bunkhouse. That night, lying in the dark, he thought about the choice he had to make. The smart choice was Clara, the easy path, a comfortable life. But he had never been a man for the easy path. He thought of Abigail Carson. He thought of her facing down a storm, teaching her son letters by lamplight, in the quiet, fierce pride in her eyes. She was like the land itself, harsh, demanding, but with a beauty that took your breath away if you were willing to look close enough. Tomorrow he would fix her roof. It was a small thing. But out here in this unforgiving world, sometimes the small things were everything. The church social was a swirl of calico dresses and sweaty cowboys, all trying to escape the oppressive heat of a Saturday night. The air buzzed with fiddle music and gossip. Ethan had barely stepped through the door when Clara found him. She was a vision in buttercup yellow, her smile as bright as her dress. "Mr. McKenna, I was afraid you weren't coming." She slid her arm through his and pulled him onto the dance floor before he could protest. She was a good dancer, light on her feet, but as they moved, her chatter about neighbors and new curtains faded into a background hum. His eyes kept finding Abigail. She stood at the edge of the room with the other widows, watching the children. She wore a simple dress of dark blue, not her usual black. It was plain, but it fit her well, hinting at curves her work clothes always hid. Her hair was softer, too. She wasn't trying to be beautiful, which somehow made her even more so. "You're not listening to me," Clara pouted. Before he could answer, a commotion erupted near the refreshment table. Mrs. Morrison, the banker's wife, was glaring at Abigail. "I specifically said the lemonade was to be served in the crystal bowl." Mrs. Morrison's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "This earthenware thing is completely unsuitable." "I'm sorry," Abigail said, her voice barely a whisper. "The crystal bowl was cracked. I thought—" "You thought—" Mrs. Morrison laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "That's the problem, isn't it? You forget your place. You are a servant now, Abigail. Servants don't think. They obey." The room went silent. Everyone was watching. Ethan saw Abigail's face flush, her hands tremble. Then Clara swept in, a golden angel of false sympathy. "How dare you speak to my dear sister that way?" she cried, placing herself between Abigail and Mrs. Morrison. "Abigail may have fallen on hard circumstances, but she is still a Whelan." It was a master class in cruelty disguised as kindness. Every word was designed to highlight Abigail's shame, to remind everyone of her dependence. "Of course, dear," Mrs. Morrison said, playing her part. "We all know how hard it must be, depending on Charity." "Indeed," Clara agreed sweetly. "Poor Abigail. It's not as if any man would have her, not with a child and no prospects." That was it. Ethan had heard enough. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, ignoring Clara's startled look. He walked right up to Abigail, whose head was bowed in humiliation. "Mrs. Carson," he said, his voice ringing out in the silent room, "might I have this dance?" The entire town of Dry Creek held its breath. Abigail looked up, her eyes wide with shock. She looked at his outstretched hand, then at the watching crowd, then back at him. A spark of defiance lit her eyes, a squaring of her shoulders. She placed her hand in his. "Thank you, Mr. McKenna." He led her to the center of the floor as whispers erupted all around them. Clara's face was a thundercloud. Tom Whelan looked like he was about to explode. "You don't have to do this," Abigail whispered as they began to move to the music. "I asked you to dance because I wanted to," he said firmly. "But why? You could have Clara. A ranch." "You're worth 10 of her," he said bluntly. She stumbled. He held her steady. "People are staring. Let them." "You don't understand," she said, her voice urgent. "This will have consequences. My father will never forgive this insult to Clara. You'll lose your job. Then I'll find another." He spun her, pulling her a little closer. "Why?" she asked again, searching his face. "Why would you risk anything for me? I'm nothing. A widow with a child, a servant in my own family's home." "Stop," he said quietly. "Stop repeating their words. You want to know why? Because I've seen you. I've seen you carve a toy for your son with your own hands. I've seen you teach him letters by lamplight after working all day. I've seen you face down a storm to protect what little you have." "That's just survival," she protested. "No," he said. "That's strength. That's love. That's everything that matters. Clara's like a china doll, pretty to look at, but she'd shatter in the first storm. You're like this land. You endure. You're real." The music stopped, but they just stood there, his hand at her waist, hers on his shoulder. "McKenna." Tom Whelan's voice cut through the moment like a whip. "A word. Outside." Ethan released Abigail slowly. "Save me another dance," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Outside, the night air was cool. Whelan rounded on him. "What in the hell do you think you're playing at? You humiliated my daughter." "I asked a woman to dance," Ethan said calmly. "If that humiliates Clara, maybe she's the one with the problem. Don't get clever with me, boy. I hired you to work cattle, not to upset the natural order of things." "The natural order? You mean the one where your youngest daughter gets to be cruel and your eldest has to take it?" "She's used goods," Whelan spat. "Another man's leavings, with another man's brat to raise. You could have had Clara, part of this ranch." "Keep your ranch," Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And if you ever speak of Abigail or her son that way again, we'll have more than words between us. I'll work out the week, then I'm gone." He turned and walked back inside, leaving Whelan sputtering in the dark. He found Abigail where he'd left her, Samuel clinging to her skirts. He ignored the stares and the whispers. "Would you like me to see you home, Mrs. Carson?" She looked at the hostile faces, at Clara's tear-streaked fury. Then she looked at him, and something blazed in her eyes. "Yes," she said clearly. "Thank you, Mr. McKenna." They walked out together, leaving the social in an uproar. Samuel chattered happily between them, unaware of the storm they had just unleashed. "You realize what you've done," Abigail said when the boy ran ahead. "Tom will make you leave. You'll have to move on." "Maybe," Ethan said. "Question is, would you come with me?" She stopped dead in the middle of the dusty road. What? I'm not a man for games, Abigail. I know what I want. I want you and Samuel, a real family. You barely know me. I know enough, he said, turning to face her in the starlight. I know you're strong and kind and brave. I know you deserve better than scraps from your sister's table. I know you make me want to be a better man. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now. They'll never forgive this. Then we'll go somewhere they don't have to. He wiped a tear away with his thumb. Marry me, Abigail. Come with me. Mama, are you sad? Samuel came running back. No, baby, she said, kneeling to hug him. Not sad. The boy looked at Ethan suspiciously. Did you make my mama cry? I hope not, Ethan said. I'm trying to make her happy. Think you could help me with that? Samuel considered this gravely. Then he asked the most important question of all. Are you going to be my new papa? Samuel, Abigail gasped. Would that be all right with you? Ethan asked the boy. Samuel shrugged. I guess. You're nice. And you like my horse. A laugh escaped Ethan's lips. Then Abigail started laughing too, through her tears. They stood there in the starlight, a cowboy, a widow, and a small boy, a tiny circle of light in the vast darkness. The life they knew in Dry Creek was over, but a new one was just beginning. The attack came in the dead of night. Ethan woke to the sound of hooves, too many moving too fast. He was out of his bunk and grabbing his rifle before his eyes were fully open. Raiders! One of the other hands yelled from the window. Orange flames were already licking at the sky from the direction of the town's bank. Gunfire split the night. It was the garrison gang. Everyone knew their reputation. They didn't leave survivors. Protect the main house, someone shouted, but Ethan's blood ran cold for another reason. Abigail. Samuel. Alone in their cabin, isolated, a perfect target. He didn't hesitate. He broke from the other hands and ran, sprinting through the darkness towards the small cabin. He was almost too late. 3 raiders were already there. One was kicking at the door, the wood splintering under the force of his boots. From inside, Ethan could hear Samuel's terrified cries and Abigail's voice, trying to soothe him even as the world was ending. There was no time for a plan. Ethan raised his rifle and fired. The man at the door dropped like a stone. The other 2 spun, their guns blazing. Ethan dove behind a woodpile as bullets chewed through the logs around him. Get that door open, one of them yelled. The woman and kid might be worth something. The man at the door raised his boot again. The door cracked. Then a sound from inside the cabin cut through the chaos. A sound of pure fury. The deafening roar of a shotgun. The raider stumbled back, clutching a shoulder shredded by buckshot. Good girl, Ethan thought, but she'd only have one more shot. He broke cover, firing as he ran. One man went down. The other got off a shot that felt like a hot poker searing across Ethan's ribs. The pain was blinding, but he kept going, tackling the last man before he could reload. They wrestled in the dirt, a desperate fight for a single gun. The raider was bigger, stronger. Ethan's wound was bleeding freely, sapping his strength. Black spots danced in his vision. The man's hands found his throat, squeezing. The shotgun roared again, right next to his ear. The pressure on his throat vanished. Ethan gasped for air. Abigail stood in the ruined doorway, the smoking shotgun in her hands, her eyes blazing with a fire that could burn the world down. The last raider lay still beside him. Ethan! She dropped the gun and fell to her knees beside him. You're hurt. Just a scratch, he lied. Though the world was tilting dangerously, he could feel the warm stickiness of blood spreading across his shirt. Her hands were already tearing strips from her nightgown, pressing them against the wound with a strength he wouldn't have thought she possessed. Why did you come? You should have stayed with the others. Had to, he said, his voice a ragged whisper. Couldn't let anything happen to you. The gunfire from the town was fading. The raid was ending. The town had fought back. With her help, he staggered into the cabin. Samuel was huddled under the bed, trembling. It's all right, baby, Abigail soothed. You can come out. Mr. Ethan saved us. The boy crawled out, his eyes huge. He looked at the blood, at the chaos, and then at Ethan. You fought the bad men, he said in a small voice. Ethan knelt carefully, ignoring the fire in his side. I did. Were you scared? Very scared, Ethan admitted. But sometimes you have to do scary things to protect the people you care about. Samuel nodded solemnly. Then he did something that broke Ethan's heart. He threw his little arms around Ethan's neck. Thank you for protecting us. Over the boy's head, Ethan met Abigail's eyes. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. The door burst open and Tom Whelan stood there, his face a mask of shock. He took in the scene. The dead men outside, Ethan's wound, Abigail in her torn nightgown, a shotgun still smoking nearby. Good God, he breathed. Are you all right? Thanks to Ethan, Abigail said, her voice firm. He risked his life for us. Whelan looked at Ethan, then at the carnage outside. Then he said something strange. Clara's hysterical, locked herself in her room at the first shot. The contrast was unspoken but clear. One daughter cowered, the other fought. After Whelan left to check on the rest of the ranch, Abigail cleaned and dressed Ethan's wound. Her hands were gentle but sure. You've done this before, he observed. Ranch life teaches you things, she said quietly. Then she paused, her hands stilling. What I feel for you, it's different. It's not a warm hearth. It's a fire. It frightens me. She looked at him, her eyes raw with emotion. When I saw those men at our door, my first thought wasn't that I was going to die. It was that I'd never had the chance to tell you I love you. He caught her hand. Then let's make sure you have the chance. This place isn't safe. Let's leave. Go somewhere new. Marry me, Abigail. Not someday, now, as soon as we can find a preacher. He cupped her face in his hands. I almost lost you tonight. I'm not wasting another second. Before she could answer, the doorway filled with people. The whole town, it seemed. They stared at the dead raiders, at Ethan's bandaged ribs, and at Abigail, the quiet widow, with a newfound respect. Heard you killed 3 of them, someone said to Ethan. Abigail shot 2, he corrected. Saved my life. Clara appeared, perfectly dressed, lamenting her delicate nerves. She looked at Abigail's torn and bloodied nightgown with disgust. I suppose those of lower circumstances become accustomed to such brutality. Yes, Abigail said, her voice calm and clear. We learn to survive. We learn to protect what's ours. Not everyone has the luxury of hiding while others fight for them. The room went silent. Enough, Tom Whelan said, his voice heavy. He looked at Ethan. You saved my daughter and grandson. I won't forget it. They're not yours to save or forget, Ethan said quietly. With respect, Mr. Whelan, Abigail has agreed to be my wife. We'll be leaving as soon as I can travel. The announcement dropped like a bomb. Clara went white with rage. You can't marry her. She's a servant. She's nothing. She's the woman I love, Ethan said, his voice ringing with conviction. The bravest woman I know. The woman who stood ready to die for her son while you were hiding under your bed. Clara fled, her sobs echoing down the hall. Tom Whelan stood there for a long moment. Then he gave a slow, tired nod. I suppose I saw this coming. Very well, Abigail. You are free to go, with my blessing. It's past time. He looked older, broken. I let Clara become what she is. Maybe if I'd raised you both the same. He couldn't finish. He just turned and left. The crowd dispersed, buzzing with enough gossip to last a year. Soon, only Ethan, Abigail, and a sleeping Samuel were left in the little cabin. A week, she said softly. The doctor said you'll need a week to heal. Don't care if the town can't tolerate us that long, he said, taking her hand. We survived a storm, a scandal, and a raid. What's a little gossip? She laughed, a real beautiful laugh. Dawn was breaking outside, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. In a week they would be gone. The cowboy who rejected the pretty sister for the widow no one wanted. But that wasn't the whole story, was it? The real story was about the woman who was worth more than all the ranches in Texas. The woman who stood in her doorway with a shotgun and fire in her eyes and proved that true strength had nothing to do with beauty and everything to do with love. The Lucky Dollar Saloon fell silent when they brought him in. Ethan McKenna, the stranger who had turned the town upside down, was laid out on a poker table, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on his ribs. Doc Pritchard, smelling of whiskey and carbolic acid, pushed his way through the crowd. "Damn fool," the doctor muttered. But there was respect in his voice. "Running off to play hero with a hole in your side." "Had to," Ethan grunted as the doctor probed the wound. "They needed me." "Most men would have protected the money," Pritchard observed, glancing toward the street where the bank still smoldered. "Wasn't the most important thing," Ethan said, his eyes finding Abigail. She stood beside him, a rock in the swirling sea of chaos. Her dress was torn, her hair was a mess, and there were powder burns on her hands. She looked more alive than anyone in the room. "Mama, is he going to be okay?" Samuel asked from a corner, clutching his carved horse like a talisman. "He'll be fine, sweetheart," she said, her voice a promise. The saloon doors swung open and Clara swept in, dressed in dramatic black, as if she were already in mourning for a life she felt she'd lost. "Papa says you're still planning this. This madness," she hissed, unable to even look at her sister. "You're leaving with her." "That's right," Ethan said. "You could have had me," she shrieked, all her practiced refinement gone. "I would have made you respectable." "Don't want to be respectable," Ethan said. "I want to be happy, and Abigail makes me happy." "She's used goods," Clara finally spat the ugly words out. "A burden. Another man's leavings." "Enough." Abigail's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. She stood up, and for the first time, Clara seemed to shrink away from her. "You're right, Clara," Abigail said, her voice dangerously calm. "I am used. I've been used by hardship, by grief, by loneliness. My hands are rough. My face is weathered. I will never be pretty again. But I know things you will never understand. I know how to nurse a sick child. I know how to keep a house through a hard winter. And I know how to load a shotgun and defend what is mine." She stepped closer to her sister, the contrast between them a chasm. One was silk and lies. The other was steel and truth. "You think you've won?" Clara sneered. "You have a saddle tramp with no prospects. You'll die poor and old before your time." "I will have a man who sees my worth," Abigail replied. "That's more than you'll ever have, with all your beauty and all your father's money." Clara raised her hand to strike, but a voice from the doorway stopped her. "That's enough, Clara." Tom Whelan stood there, his face etched with a sorrow so deep it was painful to see. "Go home." "But Papa," "I said, go home." Clara fled. Whelan walked to the table. "How bad is he, Doc?" "He'll live, but he needs a week of rest, at least." "He can recuperate at the house," Whelan said, shocking everyone. "Both of them. It's time I remembered what family means." He looked at Abigail, his eyes filled with a lifetime of regret. "I failed you, girl. Your father would have horsewhipped me for how you've been treated in his house. I gave you a roof, but I made you a servant under it. No more." He turned to the stunned crowd. "Let it be known," he said, his voice booming through the saloon, "that Abigail Carson, soon to be McKenna, leaves with my blessing and a dowry befitting a daughter of the Whelan house. Anyone who speaks against her speaks against me." The next week was a strange dream. Ethan was installed in the guest room of the main house, tended by Abigail. The town's attitude shifted overnight. The story of the raid grew with each telling, and Abigail, the shotgun-wielding widow, became a local legend. Women who had snubbed her for years now brought by pies and broth. Men who had looked through her now tipped their hats. Clara remained locked in her room, a ghost of bitterness haunting the house. But the rest of the family seemed to breathe easier without her poisonous presence. One evening, Tom Whelan called Ethan into his study. "I've arranged for a wagon," he said, not meeting Ethan's eyes. "A good sturdy one, and a team that'll get you to California. Consider it Abigail's dowry." He pushed a heavy leather pouch across the desk. The clink of gold coins was unmistakable. "This is too much," Ethan said. "No," Tom said, his voice thick. "It's not nearly enough, but it's what I can do now. Take care of her, McKenna. She's strong, but she's been hurt enough, and that boy needs a father." "They'll want for nothing," Ethan promised. Later that night, he found Abigail on the porch, staring up at the blanket of stars. 2 weeks ago, she said, her voice a whisper, I was resigned to my life, to being a servant, a burden. Now, now I have hope again, and it terrifies me. Why? Because I've lost hope before, she said, her voice breaking. What if I lose you, too? He pulled her close, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs. You won't, he said fiercely. I'm too stubborn to die, and too damn lucky to ever let you go. She leaned against him, and for a long time, they just sat in silence. A moment of peace between the storms of the past and the journey of the future. I love you, she said suddenly. I was too scared to say it before. He silenced her with a kiss. I know, he said when they parted. I've known since the first time I saw you laugh. In 2 days they would point their wagon west. The cowboy who chose the widow, the woman no one wanted, he could hardly wait to start their life. A life built not on convenience or prospects, but on the simple, brutal, beautiful truth of what they had found in each other. The morning Clara was set to leave for Denver, the sky was gray and bleak. She stood by the stagecoach, a perfect picture of tragic beauty, her face a mask of bitterness. I suppose you're satisfied, she said to Abigail. You've won. This was never a competition, Clara, Abigail replied quietly. No competition? Clara's laugh was like shattering glass. You took everything. The man I wanted, Papa's approval. You were supposed to stay in your place, grateful for our charity. And what place was that? Abigail's patience, worn thin over years of cruelty, finally snapped. The place of a servant? A burden? I am your sister, Clara. I always loved you, but you could never see past your own reflection. Love, Clara scoffed. What does love matter when you're beautiful? I'll have a dozen rich men proposing within a month, not some trail-worn cowboy with nothing but calloused hands. Ethan stepped forward, his presence a solid wall at Abigail's side. Those men might buy you, Clara, he said, his voice calm but cutting. But they will never respect you. They will never love you. You'll have everything money can buy, and you will spend the rest of your life wondering why you feel so empty. Stop it, she whispered, tears threatening her perfect facade. She has already won, Clara, Ethan continued, his words relentless. She won the day she chose love over bitterness, substance over show. The stagecoach driver called out. Clara climbed aboard. From the window, her eyes, so like Abigail's but so different, met her sister's one last time. I hate you, she said. I've always hated you. I know, Abigail said sadly. I'm sorry. You existed, Clara said. That was enough. The coach pulled away, carrying Clara and her poison west, towards a different kind of life, a different kind of emptiness. That evening, the town threw a farewell party. The same people who had whispered about Abigail now lined up to wish her well. The story of the raid had changed everything. She was no longer the pitiful widow. She was a frontier heroine. Mrs. Morrison, the banker's wife, even apologized for her cruelty. Ethan, still sore, sat and watched as men who had ignored Abigail for 2 years eagerly asked her to dance. She moved with a grace he'd never seen, a lightness in her step, but her eyes kept finding his across the room, a silent promise between them. She looks happy, Tom Whelan said, joining him on the bench. I haven't seen her truly happy since before James died. I'll keep her that way, Ethan promised. I know you will, Tom said. Take care of her, McKenna. She's the best of us. Later, Ethan insisted on one dance despite the pain in his ribs. He held her in his arms in the center of the room. I want them all to see, he whispered, that the cowboy who rejected the beautiful sister chose right. The next morning, the sun rose on their wedding day. The little church was packed. Ethan waited at the altar, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his healing ribs. Then he saw her. She came down the aisle on her father's arm, wearing her mother's simple wedding dress. The worn widow was gone. In her place was a bride, her eyes luminous with a hope that had refused to die. The pastor's words were a blur. All Ethan could see was Abigail. All he could hear was her voice, clear and strong, saying, I do. He slid the simple gold band onto her finger. He was no longer just Ethan McKenna, drifter. He was a husband, a father. He was home. You may kiss your bride, the pastor said. Outside, the wagon was packed and ready. They said their goodbyes. Tom shook his hand. Martha wept and hugged Abigail. Samuel, clutching a new pocket knife from his grandfather, scrambled into the back of the wagon. Ethan helped his wife onto the seat, then climbed up beside her. He took the reins in his hands. Behind them stood the town of Dry Creek, a place of hardship and unexpected grace. Ahead lay the vast open prairie and the promise of California. "Ready?" he asked. She placed her hand over his. "Ready." "California, here we come," Samuel shouted from the back. The wagon rolled forward, away from the past and into the future. The cowboy had rejected the beautiful sister and chosen the widow no cowboy wanted. But the story was so much bigger than that. He had chosen strength. He had chosen courage. He had chosen a love that was as real and enduring as the land itself. The sun climbed higher, blessing their journey. Samuel started to sing, his small voice bright with joy. Ethan joined in, his deep baritone a steady harmony. Then Abigail added her voice, and their song rose over the prairie, a prayer of thanksgiving for a future they would build together, hand in hand. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Ethan and Abigail's journey from prejudice to acceptance, from loneliness to love. Where are you listening to this story from? Please comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts about this tale. Did Ethan make the right choice? What do you think happened to Clara? I'd love to hear your perspectives on this frontier romance.